It is hard to believe that in 2023 we are still experimenting on other animals. Millions of dogs, cats, rabbits, monkeys, etc. are locked up in labs all over the world right now, being tortured in ways that you and I can never imagine. All in the name of research and testing. Obviously, most of us, if not all of us, want these places to be shut down because we deeply care about their suffering and the urgent need to liberate them. But some of us start to wonder maybe this kind of experimentation is necessary for human progress. Now, to answer these pressing questions and to give us realistic solutions to end their suffering is Dr. Andre Menache. Now, Andre is one of those rare individuals who has had a clear idea of what his mission in life is. Having qualified both in zoology and veterinary medicine, Andre is one of the world's leading experts on the issue of animal experimentation. Previously, he's been the president of the organization Doctors and Lawyers for Responsible Medicine, and currently he is the chairman of the board at the Animal Interfaith Alliance. He has made incredible progress in raising awareness on this issue and has been previously involved in several international campaigns to bring an end to this horrible practice.
If we do not do this, if we do not have a serious scientific debate, we are letting down the 1.17 million people who signed the ECI, we are letting down the animals, and we are letting down patients who want cures based on personalized medicine, not animal tests. Because I think we will win the scientific debate, and once the public realizes that animal testing is not a necessary evil, which is what we've been sold for years and years and years, we can take away the necessary because we have the technology. All that's left is the evil. Public opinion will not tolerate evil and will sweep away the evil. Thank you.
Now, for those of you who missed it, he was recently featured on GB News after a facility that was experimenting on puppies was exposed.
Campaigners are calling for an independent hearing and a ban on animal testing after horrifying footage emerged showing inhumane conditions inside a beagle puppy farm. It's necessary to test animals. What would your answer be to that?
I would say that about 30 years ago, perhaps we didn't have anything better. I mean, just to be blunt, we could replace animal testing today, but two things need to happen.
At the heart of his daily work is his deep compassion for all beings and the environment, and he's supported by his spiritual practices and his astounding level of physical fitness. Personally, I was left deeply inspired by the end of the conversation, where we delved into his life's journey to the point where he is right now. And I remain empowered to supporting the campaigns that Andre is championing today. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Andre Menache. Andre, so good to see you. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. I know it's been a few weeks since trying to organize this. We are looking forward to a very interesting and inspiring conversation today about a topic that I feel not many people know about. But more than that, I really want to know about your life and what was it that brought you onto what you're doing today. So before we begin, where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you. Well, thank you, Keval, for having me. I'm speaking to you from just outside of Paris.
Nice. It's. I think we're both blessed with some good weather today. This is a question I ask all my guests, and I think it's a really good way to start it off. Two of the most important days in our life. First day is the day that we are born, and the second day is the day we find out why. What I want to know is what wakes you up in the morning. What do you think is your life's purpose? If you could just summarize that for us to start with.
So that is a huge question, of course, and a complex question. But I think I'm one of those very fortunate people who has a clear idea of his or her mission in life, and that's what gets me up in the morning. I've always had an affinity for animals. We've always had pets at home ever since I can remember, whether it was pet guinea pigs as a child, later on my beloved dog, and at the moment I'm blessed to be surrounded by 2 cats. So I've always loved animals, and my urge to make things better, to improve their situation on this planet, and to reduce suffering as much as possible. I think that is the big motivator, and that's the main reason for me getting up in the morning.
Brilliant. Yeah, you are truly blessed to have all that inspiration around you every day. What was your childhood like? And I know you said you've always had the affinity towards animals, but what was it like growing up? And what was your outlook towards other animals in terms of how it, began and how it changed over time? And did you always have this urge to help them? Did you always have the urge to make this world a better place in that way?
So I think that perhaps the fact that my parents moved around so much, that I lived in so many different countries. I was born in Belgium, and I was taken to the Belgian Congo as a 10-month-old baby. And then when I was 5, we left the Congo because of the civil war, moved to Zimbabwe. After 5 years in Zimbabwe, we moved to Zambia. 3 years later, South Africa for 14 years, and so on and so forth. I think, although I sort of had an ability to make friends quickly every time we moved, perhaps I had some animal friends who I felt close to or closer to than my human friends. I always remember being surrounded by animals, even if it was stray animals, that I would play with in the afternoon instead of playing with my friends. So it's possible that this may have had something to do with it. The fact that I was uprooted so many times. The upside to moving around, I think, gives you a sort of a broader perspective on life. So I think that is, I would encourage anyone who can travel to do so. I think that's wonderful on a personal growth level, and also on for one's spiritual growth. So obviously I also did some stupid things as a child. For example, I was given a pellet gun, and I used to shoot lizards, which I deeply regret. But overall, I felt that animals were very, very close to me. I felt very close to animals, and I've always wanted to help them all my life, and that's one of the reasons I decided to become a veterinarian.
How did that change your outlook? Because the one thing that I get quite confused about even now is when I meet other vets and they are still eating animals and consuming their products and all of that. It's almost like eating your own patients. And what was that like for you? Because I know it is a unique thing as a veterinarian. I'm probably wrong. Maybe I'm right. I don't know. It's if in terms of how many vets are going vegan or having that more of an awareness about what's going on. But what was that like when it comes to the reasons why we do things? I think yours was even more connected in terms of your feelings and your empathy towards other animals.
So I had already given up eating meat and chicken before I went into veterinary school. So I was about 20 when I gave up eating meat and chicken. And vet school, there's no doubt about it, you are desensitized. You go through a process of desensitization. Some people might call it compassion fatigue, but I don't think that's the right term. So one doesn't realize that one is being desensitized. And don't forget that an important part or a large part of veterinary studies is looking after farm animals and farm production. Although most vets, of course, would rather go and have their own clinic, open up a clinic and look after dogs and cats. And that is what most vets do. And perhaps there is a crisis today in the farming industry, that there are not enough vets. There, I think, is also a shortage of vets in research, because vets prefer to open their own clinic. Now, what is quite extraordinary is when I was a veterinary student, out of 100 vet students, there were about 10 ladies and the rest were guys. And today, it's virtually the opposite way around. I think that's a good thing, because I think women are innately more compassionate than men. And also, I'm discovering that there are more and more vegan veterinarians, more women, obviously, because there are more women now in the profession than ever before, and women are innately more compassionate than men. That's my personal point of view. So I think it's a good thing. It's evolving. Yeah.
Some years ago, I came across an article about the number of suicides amongst veterinarians, and it was quite shocking. But I guess in a way understandable as well. But would you have any inclination on why there's such a high suicide rate?
I think there's an immense amount of pressure, not just vets, also on dentists, also on doctors. They also have high rates of suicide and divorce. But speaking for my own profession, I went through a very dark night of the soul just after I qualified, because I wanted to work in an animal shelter. My dream was not to have a clinic and to sell flea collars and dog food, or to make money out of treating dogs. My aim was to help animals, and I felt I could do that best by working in an animal shelter. And this was in Durban, South Africa. So I had just qualified. I had just spent 5 years learning how to look after and save animals' lives. And one of the first things that I had to do was to put healthy dogs to sleep. And I spent months with sleepless nights asking myself if this was really the job, if this is really what I wanted to do. And I reconciled myself by saying that I had to go through this, because ultimately I would do more harm. I beg your pardon. I would do more good than harm over the years. And if it was not me euthanizing the dogs, it would be somebody else, perhaps, who cared less. So that was, but that was unique, because most vets are not in shelter work. Most vets are in private practice, and there is such a huge workload on them. Because if you compare it to a medical doctor is usually working in a hospital environment or in a practice where there's several partners. There isn't that kind of money in veterinary medicine. So usually you're either on your own, or you may be with one or two other partners. So you have to be a good clinician, you have to be a good surgeon, you have to be a good accountant, you have to be good at interpersonal relationships, you have to respect all the codes of conduct. That is a huge load, and I think that could be part of the reason why there is such a high suicide rate in the veterinary profession. I think also it means that we need to look for something outside of simply treating animals. Vets, like any other person, need to find an outlet. So whether it's meditation, whether it's sport, whether it's studying alternative therapies. So in other words, when conventional medicine doesn't give you all the answers, today we're actually quite lucky in that there are alternative therapies available where conventional medicine fails. So I hope that's more or less answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. I had two questions from what you just said. What kind of work is done on farms when it comes to, you said, the fact that most of the work involved looking after farmed animals. What kind of work is involved? Because, if you really look at what is going on, the level of exploitation, uh, the eventual killing of all these beings that are confined on farms. How do we rationalize the work that they do? Because in a way, they're trying to help them, but we know that in the end, they're all going to be killed. They're all going to be exploited, abused, all sorts of things. So, what kind of work's involved here?
So the duty of a vet in farm production, whether it's salmon farming, whether it's poultry, whether it's beef or dairy, the primary duty of the vet is to ensure that the animals are healthy when they are slaughtered. That is the primary duty of care. Obviously, from my perspective, there's a huge conflict of interest because the farmer wants the animal to grow as quickly as possible. They want to pack as many animals in confined spaces as possible. They want to increase productivity, to increase profits. And that comes at a cost. And the cost is animal welfare, not just animal welfare. It's also human health. Because we know that intensive farming practices are an ideal breeding ground for viruses, such as swine flu, such as poultry, such as bird flu, which can infect humans. So I think there we've crossed far too many of nature's red lines. In nature, animals are never that closely packed together. So an animal that dies from a virus will die, where it'll drop and it won't infect the others. But under intensive farming practices, that's just an ideal breeding ground for viruses, for bacteria. And so these farming practices lend themselves to overuse of antibiotics, which in turn leads to antibiotic resistance, not just in veterinary medicine, but in human medicine, in addition to all the pollution related to these intensive farming practices, the water pollution, the huge consumption of fresh water. So I think this can only have a deleterious effect on the environment, on animal health, on human health, and the sooner mankind wakes up to this reality, the better.
Thank you. That's very well put. The second question I had is shelter work. Now, this was probably about 10, 15 years ago. I watched Earthlings for the first time. And the first chapter of this incredibly eye-opening documentary was about pets and the industry itself. The fact that we've artificially created dogs and cats from beings that were once wild, just a few thousand years ago, we have created a nightmare right now whereby there is an overpopulation of all these so-called companion animals, to the point where, from what I found out, shelters are literally overflowing with lonely cats, dogs, and other animals who just want to be looked after, who just want love, who just want affection, and want to be part of a family, so to speak. But because there are so many, I don't know about the UK, but in so many countries around the world, they just get killed because they say that they don't have the resources for them. There's just too many of them. And it opened my eyes to how extensive the problem is. The numbers are even more astounding. I don't know if you know a more accurate figure when it comes to that, but how big of a problem is it right now when it comes to these animals?
Well, unfortunately, humans, again, they've messed with nature. On the one hand, we have breeds of dogs that are basically genetic monsters. And hopefully there's more and more awareness, public awareness today, about dogs that have very flat noses and that have difficulty breathing. Just to name one example. So yes, I would suggest to people, if they want a dog, they must realize it's a lifelong investment, and they should go to a shelter and adopt a dog from a shelter and not buy a fancy breed, because there are just so many dogs in the shelters waiting for homes, for loving homes. We don't need to purpose breed animals. And most of the purpose bred animals contain genetic defects. So that's a huge issue. I remember many years ago working in a shelter, we suddenly got flooded with Dalmatians. And the reason for that was that the Walt Disney movie, 101 Dalmatians, all children were asking their parents, "Oh, mummy, can I have a Dalmatian puppy?" Dalmatian puppies are extremely cute. However, Dalmatian males, the male dogs, are actually fairly aggressive. And they not only bite other dogs, they sometimes bite people as well. So we, after these cute Dalmatian puppies grew into adults, and especially the males, the parents didn't want them anymore, and we were flooded with Dalmatians. So this is, if you like, one of the side effects where the film industry made a breed very, very popular, and people didn't do their homework. They didn't study what are the breed characteristics. In the same way that, beagle dogs were bred for hunting, and they need to walk or run 5 miles a day to be happy and healthy. And when they find themselves in laboratory cages, that is extreme suffering. So that's just sort of an aside. But yes, there are, unfortunately, animals are being exploited for their cuteness, and there's always going to be people out there who love the appearance of a cute puppy, not knowing where it comes from, not knowing that it may be carrying genetic defects, and it's just to make money. It's people making money out of the public's ignorance or naivety.
I that made me think of a dental colleague of mine who volunteers at an animal rescue center, whereby this is a rescue center that just it rescues dogs that have been bred in captivity. A lot of these dogs who are rescued are found to have cataracts in their eyes, because throughout their short lives, since the day they're born, most of them are kept in the dark, right? So again, other diseases, but cataracts are such a big problem for the ones that get rescued. And what's shocking is there's always an oversupply when it comes to all these artificially bred dogs. This is a problem that's in England. This is a country that is, proud in the so-called animal welfare standards. And yet here is a species that the nation loves and adores, and would have nothing happen to them if they show any cruelty towards dogs or cats. There would be a public outcry. But we still have laws, I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, that how are we still allowed to breed dogs in a so-called dog-loving country? Because, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, the laws are always behind the times. It's I think a more important, or at least as important, aspect is to educate people. So educate as in kindergarten, as in primary school, to teach respect, compassion towards animals, and to bring up the problem of the overpopulation of dogs, the responsibility that comes with owning or sharing your life with a companion animal. I think we need to raise the value. We need to raise the bar. And I think education has a huge role to play. And I think the animal protection organizations are aware of this, and they do go into schools and they do educate. So I think education is just as important as legislation, because unfortunately legislation is not always easy to enforce. A, and B, the penalties are not necessarily going to put people off.
How difficult or easy is it to change the law about something that I think the whole country would agree with, to stop breeding dogs because of the horrendous conditions? Is it something that's impossible? Is it something that can be done? What are the ways that we could do this?
I think it's very difficult to try to control the problem by changing the law, because the people who are responsible for the animal cruelty or the animal breeding or overbreeding always seem to find ways around the law, or else they'll simply do it, underground. So again, I think it comes back to education. It's educating people not to buy puppies that are smuggled in from Eastern Europe, or buy animals that are genetically malformed. So it's down to education primarily.
I'm sorry to have to bring this up, but the first time you had to put a healthy dog to sleep, what was that like? Do you remember that bit? Because things like that would never leave me. What was that like for you?
So that was heartbreaking. As I said, I spent many sleepless nights over it. I think the hardest experience I had was when we decided to give some dogs sort of a last chance, because normally we could keep them for about 1 or 2 weeks in the shelter, and then we would have to put them to sleep to make room for the others that were coming in. And so we had a group of dogs, rescued dogs, and we thought we'd give them a one last chance. And we had a lot of volunteers come and doll them up, put talcum powder on them, ribbons on their heads, really, they put in a huge effort. And we had a sort of a public event, and the ones that didn't find homes had to be put to sleep, and that was heartbreaking. When you've got a perfectly healthy dog with a ribbon on its head, and you have to put that dog to sleep. So that to me was pretty much close to my breaking point.
Thank you for sharing that. For me, when it came to animal experimentation and the problem with that, I was actually in London walking down the street somewhere near King's Cross, and there was a table there with people giving leaflets out, and that's when I first saw the image of a beagle dog in a cell, and there was always all this information about them being experimented on. The corporation at that time that they were campaigning against was Huntingdon Life Sciences. I know this is something that you study and you research and you help fight against day in, day out. What made you? What was that point? What made you just dedicate your life to this?
So my first encounter with animal experimentation was as a zoology student in South Africa, and subsequently as a veterinary student in South Africa, and discovering the Journal of the South African Association Against Painful Experiments on Animals around about 1977 or 1978. And that just lit a fuse somewhere. And that got me asking questions. And even as a veterinary student, I already started debating the use of animals in medical research and testing. And whenever I found myself opposite a medical researcher or a doctor, they would always say the same thing. They would say, we like animals, but we like people even more. Or we like babies even more. And I didn't have an answer to that. And so that's what pushed me to look for scientific arguments against animal experiments. So for 25 years, I worked as a vet because I needed to earn money and pay the bills, and my activities against animal experimentation was sort of on the sidelines, and also raising a family, etc., etc. So my mission was really to be full time campaigning against animal experiments. So again, I'm blessed, I'm fortunate to have had 25 years of working as a veterinary surgeon and also being able to campaign against animal experiments on the side. But for the past 20 years, almost 20 years, I have been campaigning full time against animal experiments. Now, when I do debates, for example, at universities, and I've done quite a few debates in the UK. I remember once in Birmingham, University of Birmingham, one of the students came up to me at the end of the talk and said, it was a debate actually. He said, you gave a very convincing talk, but if you are right, if you are correct, why are there so few other scientists out there like you? And I said, that's an excellent question. And I said, the answer is very easy. I said, find me people who have the following 4 criteria. Number 1, they must be authoritative. So they must have a background in biological sciences, medical sciences, be a doctor, a vet, a pharmacist. That's point number 1. Point number 2, they have to be able to spend 2 to 3 hours a day on the internet to stay up to date on the latest developments, what's happening in terms of animal research and what's happening in terms of non-animal research. In other words, replacement methods. So that already means that anybody who's full-time in practice as a vet, as a doctor, they do not have 2 to 3 hours a day to spend on the internet. So that already reduces by a big margin the number of people available. The third element is that you have to be a good communicator. By a good communicator, I mean you have to be able to present complex subjects in terms that the average member of the public can understand. So you can be brilliant, but if you don't know how to explain complex subjects to the public, and animal experimentation is a complex subject. So you have to be a good communicator. And fourth and final, you have to be financially independent. Now, what do I mean by that? I have colleagues who are at university and who are opposed to animal experimentation, and they have been told in no uncertain terms by the hierarchy at the university that if they speak out against colleagues who do animal experiments, they will very quickly find themselves out of a job. Now, that is called institutional intimidation. So when you put all those 4 things together, when you try and find people who have all those 4 qualities, that explains why there are so few people out there who have the tools, the knowledge, and the confidence to go on television, on public television, and debate against an animal researcher or simply to give information out there. And this is, I think, one of the biggest roles of people like myself, of scientists, to give support to animal protection organizations who are opposed to animal experimentation on ethical grounds, but who do not necessarily have the scientific backup to back their arguments. And I'm very pleased to say that in the last 10 or 20 years, I've seen a huge swing from demonstrations, and we can talk about the UK. 10 or 20 years ago, if you were at an animal rights meeting or campaign against animal experiments, the posters would read, "Stop animal experiments, they're cruel." Today, you attend that same meeting, the poster reads, "Stop animal experimentation, it doesn't work." To me, that is a huge step forward. That means the animal rights community has got the message.
I used to give school talks with animal aid. And one of the big topics was animal experimentation. And one of the facts that we shared was that 9 out of 10 experiments done on animals do not work when they are tested on humans. There were other things about, different drugs doing different interactions with animals and different with humans. And the basic message was, while we're all similar in terms of the way we want to survive, we desire affection and safety, and we despise danger, we run away from danger, we don't want to be killed or hurt, and there's so many ways that we are similar to other animals. But fundamentally, when it comes to the physiology, when it comes to the way the body works, there are fundamental differences, and to the cellular level. And it is it becomes, I guess, more obvious when we think about it that way, that the best thing that we could do when it comes to research and experimentation on animals is to not do it anymore, because, like you said, it does not work. And yet here we are, 2023, still a massive problem. I've heard the universities are a challenge as well, because they are used to things, of procedures that were done decades ago. There is a problem with the funding. There is a problem with politics behind all of this. What are some of the challenges to overcome if we are to move away? Because this is something that's ingrained within our education system as well. There's firstly not even enough awareness about it to start with, but also the fact that, like I said, funding, politics. How big of a problem is it? And is there something with what I've shared that might be incorrect that you would have more information on?
So firstly, I'd like to echo some of the things that you said, because it's very important what you said. I had the good fortune of working at Animal Aid under the director, the late Andrew Tyler, who taught me a lot, and who encouraged me to give school talks, especially the older kids and also universities. And I remember giving the same examples that you did, where people said, yes, but aren't we similar to animals? And the word similar in science is not scientifically sound. We share about 50% of our DNA with a banana. So, be very careful, be wary of the word similar. Okay, so what those school talks taught me was how to explain things in simple terms. There's a marketing saying that says, the bigger the audience, the simpler the message. So when you're talking to the general public, or when you're speaking to school kids, you have to make sure that a 10-year-old can understand what you're talking about. And so I have a huge debt of thanks to UK school children who allowed me to give school talks, and they asked me questions which made me go away and think about how best to answer it, or the fact that I could see on the child's face that I didn't answer that question very well. So so communication is really hugely important, and that comes back to your question, because today I'm more optimistic than ever regarding the technology available to replace animal testing, the use of animals, which was not available, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. So we have this technology, this amazing 21st century technology, which is way, way more predictive than animal testing. And really the challenge is no longer the technology, it's how do you communicate the good news to politicians, to the public, and most importantly to shareholders in the pharmaceutical industry and the chemical industry. Because I'm convinced, as I'm sure you are, that if you show shareholders in the pharmaceutical industry what happens to beagles in laboratories on one hand that are used to test, or who are used to test drugs, new drugs, You show them that picture on the one hand, and on the other hand, you show them human organs on a chip, which represents 21st century technology, which harms nobody, but which is far more reliable and predictive for testing human drugs. It's a no-brainer. It is a no-brainer. So if shareholders were to know that, I think that progress would happen far more quickly. And that is really my strategy today. All the groups that I work with, that is what I'm pushing for, is to get the message. If we can't get it directly to shareholders, then let's get it out to the general public, knowing and hoping that some of the people in the general public are shareholders.
Andre, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. 2023, what animals are being experimented on right now?
So in 2023, if we're talking numbers, first of all, just numbers, in the UK, it's about 3 million animals per year. Worldwide, it's between 80 and 100 million animals per year. Most, 80%, 85% are rodents, so that'll be mice, mostly genetically modified mice, rats, hamsters, guinea pigs. Then behind that comes, depending on the country, it can be rabbits, it can be fish, and then smaller in numbers but significant are, for example, dogs, monkeys. So in the UK, it's between 3,000 and 4,000 monkeys per year. Dogs, specifically beagles, is around 4,000 animals per year. And most of those dogs and monkeys will be used by the pharmaceutical industry to test potential human drugs.
Thank you. We had a few rats in the garden last year, and it gave me an opportunity to observe them and just to see what they do, on a day-to-day basis. And some of the things that they did was obviously try and collect food, but also they had companions that they moved around with. They had little babies that the mother would try and find food for, but also very, very protective of their kind and of their families. So anytime I got too close, they'd run away. They'd have a warning sound as well. I wanted to take them to another place away from my garden, so I made sure that I got a couple of humane traps, which would just keep them in without killing them. And also the fact that if I were to shift them to another place, I didn't want to do them each one in isolation, because it would just break up their families. So I made sure that I'd catch at least 2 or 3 of them together, and then take them even as little groups to the same place every time, in the forest, a little bit of a drive away. What really saddened me was that few minutes that I had to keep them in a cage, and they would struggle so much to get out of that cage. They would scream. If you look into the eyes of a rat in a cage, it's just pure terror. It's just, fear, terror. All they want to do is get out, and almost like, they're holding the cage, almost begging to get out, or fighting frantically against the metal, trying to break it, do everything they can. This is the most fundamental response from any sentient being who wanted freedom and didn't want to be locked up or be away from their family. And I feel if anyone got to see that with their eyes, they would know that, rats especially, they're not beings that like being in a cage or in a maze or just being experimented on in all sorts of ways. Same thing with fishes. And you see the same dynamic again. You see families, you see mothers looking after their babies, companions, friends playing around. It's literally a kingdom, right? And on the same basis, them looking out for each other when there's danger, but also when the net comes in and takes all of them out, again, destroying families. So the emotional side of that trauma, but also the need and the desperation to try and escape and survive, and the physical pain that we put them through when we haul them out of the ocean is the same thing that when someone were to drown us underwater, it's that same struggle to breathe. If we ever were to see it physically with our eyes, or even in a documentary or film or whatever, we'll realize that none of those beings that you mentioned are inanimate objects. They are all sentient beings who we share this planet with, who have the 3 Fs, as I call it: friends, family, and feelings. So the second question then is, what kind of experiments are being done? What kind of medical testing is being done?
Okay, so just to echo some of the things that you said, we can study animals non-invasively in their natural surroundings and learn so much about them. But what we know is, for example, that fish have receptors for Valium, diazepam. So if they have receptors for diazepam, means they can feel stress. Rats have been shown to have empathy. So, you put a rat in a situation, which is what some animal researchers have done, where on the one hand, another rat is having difficulty in a water bath, it's nearly drowning, or the rat can have a treat like a chocolate. Well, the rat will always go and save its mate. So that is empathy. And also rats have a sense of self, because if you line up 10 rats and you each give them a name and you call them by name, they will come one by one. So they have a sense of self. So, rats are wonderful, wonderful creatures. To get back to your question, I just to simplify things, I would say there are 3 different categories. So the first is education, which accounts for less than 1% of animal use in the UK anyway. And I'm pleased to say that the UK is one of the leading countries in the world where the use of animals has been replaced in education. I'm talking about dissection, and I'm talking about the use of animals for, surgical competence. So there is such a wonderful availability of, tools like virtual reality, mannequins, models, and the go-to organization is called Interniche, interniche.org, and I've had the pleasure of working with them. So in terms of replacement of animals in education, it's a success story, and we're almost there. In terms of the numbers used are really very, very small, especially in the UK. We then look at the use of animals for regulatory requirements. So the use of animals for putting a new drug, a new pharmaceutical drug onto the market, or a new chemical onto the market. That accounts for between 20 and 25% of all the animals used in science in the UK and worldwide. So that's a huge number. And that has been brought to the fore because of all the demonstrations at MBR, the beagle breeding facility, and the demonstrations that you're aware of in the past. So slowly, the public is becoming aware of this. Now, this is where it becomes exciting, is that today the technology available can replace this sort of animal testing, because it is so far better at predicting human outcome than the animal tests. So there is no excuse, there is absolutely no reason to continue animal testing to put drugs and chemicals onto the market. Because also don't forget that when you use an animal to test a new drug, we may be losing lots of good drugs, because we may think a drug is toxic in an animal and it might not be toxic in humans. I can give you the example of penicillin. Penicillin can be used safely in rats and mice, but you would never give it to a hamster or a guinea pig because it could kill them. So there you've got a perfect example all four of these animal species are rodents. In other words, they're all in the same family, in the rodent family. And I've just proved to you, if I use rats and mice, that penicillin will save your life. And if I use hamsters and guinea pigs, never take penicillin because it could kill you. So we really must get, out of this paradigm of using animals to test products intended for human use. And once again, I think the shortest way to success is through shareholders. If shareholders can hear this message and can be shown a few videos of what happens to animals in laboratories, and see one or two publications on organs on chips, human organs on chips, it's a no-brainer. So that would account for 20 to 25% of all animal use. So, for example, beagles, when they are used to test a new drug, they will be force-fed. They will have a tube passed down into their stomach up to 3 times a day for up to 90 days. And then at the end of the 90 days, they will not be sent to a rest home. They will be killed so that their organs can be studied. So that is the sad truth of what happens to 3,000 to 4,000 beagles every year in the UK. And the information we're getting from those beagles is relevant to beagles. It's not relevant to humans. So it's a scandal. It's horrendous. And then finally, the third category of major animal use is fundamental research and applied research. Now, this is basically scientific research conducted in universities and in research institutes. And it accounts for the biggest category of animals used. And most of them are smaller animals, in other words, rats and mice. And unfortunately, there is very little that the public has to say about these animal experiments. Firstly, because the animal researchers keep to themselves. They have ethical committees which consist of mostly animal researchers and other scientists involved in animal research, and very little public representation. If the public knew what was being done with its own tax money, I think there would be a huge outcry. But for most of the public, it's a case of believing the claims made by animal researchers, because we regularly read about these in the newspaper once a week. Researchers discover new anti-cancer drug in mice. And that reinforces the idea that we need to test animals or to use animals to find cures for people. What most people don't know is that out of all these claims by animal researchers, there's been a very, very important study done looking at 25,000 articles, 25,000 published articles, claiming that this kind of research would lead to some clinically useful outcome. And so the authors of this study, if you like, it's an audit, a scientific audit. So they looked at 25,000 articles and they waited over a period of about 25 years, because animal researchers will tell you that to get a concept from the laboratory into the clinic takes about 25 years. And so the authors patiently waited 25 years. And at the end of the 25 years, they once again looked at what these 25,000 articles produced. And the result was the success rate of application of basic research, which is scientific curiosity, to the clinic was 0.004%. That is unacceptable in terms of animal suffering, in terms of investment. And yet the public obviously is unaware of this very, very important study. So again, this is something that could come out if there was, for example, a parliamentary inquiry into animal experimentation, which is what is being asked for in Early Day Motion 278 at the moment in the UK. And so I would like to use this opportunity to tell people, to tell the public, to contact their local MP and to ask their local MP to support EDM 278 for a rigorous public scientific inquiry into the whole issue of animal experimentation.
Thank you for that. That gives me some hope into this subject, definitely. And I'm so happy and so glad that there are people like you out there who are working so diligently on this. Is there a link or something that the public can go to access this, or is this something that is there a sample or some sort of template that people can use to contact their MPs with when it comes to this letter that they need to write?
So there is an organization called For Life on Earth, FLOE, For Life on Earth. They are behind EDM 278. So much information can be obtained from that website. And simply going to EDM 278 on the internet, they'll find the details of this early day motion. And there is also information on the Animal Interfaith Alliance website. If people who are interested not just in animal research, but there is a lot of information on animal research and the campaigns that I've spoken to you about. They can be seen, they can be found on the website of the Animal Interfaith Alliance.
Is there anything else than the public can do? So, like you mentioned, the first thing they can do is contact their MPs. Secondly, we're hoping that some of the people, some of the audience who are listening to this right now are shareholders in all these companies that are involved in this. I feel thirdly that anyone who's listening to this, everyone in fact, can share it widely with as many people as they know, and there's always a high chance then that it'll reach the right ears and the people who have the most influence on this very, very important topic. Is there anything else that we can do?
The public is perhaps not aware of how much consumer power it has. So it can apply the consumer power, for example, in buying products not tested on animals. So, for example, cruelty-free cosmetics or cruelty-free household products, they are not completely animal test-free, but it's a step in the right direction. And the more people insist on that, that is what drives industry. Consumer demand and consumer opinion, those are very important drivers. So as far as the cosmetics industry is concerned, as far as household products is concerned, consumer pressure, consumer opinion. Obviously, when it comes to medical drugs, you don't have that choice because everything must be tested or will have been tested on animals. And that is therefore the different approach, which is where we need to get the shareholders involved.
Coincidentally, I actually spoke to someone last week randomly, and we just got into a conversation about what he did before he retired recently. And he said that he was a tester in biological labs for the quality of the air, making sure there are no allergens or anything in the air. So I asked him, what exactly do you mean by biological labs? And he said these are all the labs that animals are caged in and tested upon. But he was quick to say that in the UK, the facilities are the best in the world, and he was so proud of the facility itself. And it just made me think, like, what a way to justify something that's so horrible. He made it sound like it was some sort of spa that the animals went to. But the bottom line is, not only are they tortured, but correct me if I'm wrong, every single animal that ends up in one of these labs gets killed in the end, right?
Yeah, 99.999% will be killed. Maybe one rat will find a home.
I'm so thankful that groups like Animal Rebellion are making such a public statement by their actions, especially when it comes to just the recent action with MBR Acres, how they were able to rescue some beagle dogs. Unfortunately, they were taken back by the police. The dogs were. I don't know how many they managed to help, but again, they were held by the police, and they were deemed as contaminated property as well. So my guess is that they were probably killed as well in the end. We definitely need more action, more awareness by people who are interested in this, by people who are concerned about what's going on, by groups like Animal Rebellion. These are things that we should have public support on. We should have public funding to support these kind of campaigns. What other signs of hope do you see when it comes to this? And how do you feel about the way the movement is going? Is it something that we can definitely move faster on? How do you feel it's all going right now?
As I mentioned earlier, I think the animal rights community has understood that in addition to the ethical arguments, there is a scientific argument. And the scientific argument gives the animal rights community the confidence perhaps that they didn't have 20 years ago. In other words, they know they are right. As far as the science is concerned, we've won. We've won on the science. Animal testing does not work. Animal testing is bad science. Animal testing is one of the biggest health scandals of the century and last century as well. And it should not dictate public policy. It is polluting. It is causing unnecessary animal deaths and human suffering as well. So I'm very optimistic that we've got the science is on our side. It's now a question of communicating the good news to politicians, to the general public, to the shareholders. And the more efficiently and quickly we can do that, the sooner we will see animal testing be put in the dustbins of history. And once animal testing, for example, is replaced in the pharmaceutical and chemical industry, it will have a domino effect. It will have a knock-on effect on the research that is being done in universities. Because the industry will say to the researchers, the research teams, we're not interested in animal results, in animal data anymore. We want the data from your experiments on human organs on chips, for example.
Andre, do you know what I love also about you is the fact that your work is in alignment with your moral values. And it makes sense now completely that you live a vegan lifestyle. Tell me about how it all connected together with your work and your lifestyle. How did that start, and what's that journey been like?
So I think I had an early introduction to vegetarianism through my uncle, my late uncle in South Africa, who was president of the Theosophical Society. So he was a vegetarian, as was his wife. And so they introduced me to the idea of vegetarianism when I was around 14 or 15 years old. And I decided to give up meat and chicken at the age of 20. And then it took me a while to give up fish, dairy, etc. And then to realize that veganism is the logical endpoint, if you like. And so to me, it's been a natural progression. And as you say, it's allowed me to be consistent with my outlook on the animals with whom we share the planet, the environment, the plants. So yes, it's great to be in a place where everything fits together like a puzzle.
Just as an example, what are some of the arguments you've had back when you've tried to explain to people your work and your lifestyle? What is some of the common ones that people argue with?
Well, basically, people say, if we don't test on animals, what are we going to test on? Are we going to test on people? And I would say to them, well, actually, we already are testing on people. It's called clinical trials. We don't call it human experimentation because that sounds awful. So we call it clinical trials. And these are terms that the pharmaceutical industry have invented. In the same way that they've invented the use of the term human volunteers. Human volunteers in phase 1 clinical trials. In other words, in early clinical trials, the pharmaceutical industry needs healthy people to allow themselves to be experimented upon because they need human data. They know they cannot trust the animal data. And so they came up with this idea of using healthy human volunteers, usually healthy young white men between the ages of 25 and 35, average height and weight, non-smokers. Why men? Because men have fewer side effects than women to drugs. Why white men? White men have fewer side effects to drugs than Africans, Chinese, Asiatics. So it's not a coincidence that the pharmaceutical industry have selected this group of people. And the beauty of replacing animal testing is that you also replace the use of healthy human volunteers, because organs on chips can do virtually what an organ in a healthy human can do. So the use of healthy human volunteers is a total aberration. We all know that a human body does not react to a drug in the same way as a sick body, as an ill person. So, that is, again, something that society has been conditioned to, has never questioned the use of healthy human volunteers, which is crazy when you think about it. Because these so-called volunteers, they're not volunteering, they're being paid, first of all. And when you take part in a clinical trial, you sign a document of informed consent. Now, informed consent, by signing it, what you're doing is you are giving legal consent. Legal consent is not the same as valid consent. Valid consent means you know what you're letting yourself in for. Well, you don't know what you're letting yourself in for because you're the first human to ever take this drug. So that's the sort of arguments, that's the sort of things that I get asked, and those are the sort of answers that I provide.
That's very revealing. And you know what? It made me think about antibiotics again. Now, I know the UN has said that by the year 2050, it's predicted conservatively that 10 million people are going to die every year because of antibiotic resistance. And that's going to cost the global economy about $100 trillion. So even for politicians or people in power who only care about money and not people's lives, they have a lot to lose by this looming crisis. I'm already having cases whereby when I prescribe antibiotics to people, they don't work. And I don't think most people realize that penicillin is our last best hope. We haven't discovered anything newer. We haven't discovered anything more powerful. And considering the fact that more and more resistance is building, I'm worried and afraid that people closest to me and the general public are going to die from all the things that we prevent today. And it feels like we're all just sleeping through this. What are your thoughts on this? Is this something that you agree with, and what's going on with the resistance is there?
Yeah, unfortunately, from the politicians' point of view, they're only interested in the short term. They're not really worried about the long term because they're going to be out of office by 2050 or by 2030. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that we need to look at the source of antibiotic resistance. And a big source of the problem is intensive farming practices. So we need to get rid of intensive farming practices. There are examples where people who work in farms, intensive factory farming situations, when they get a bladder infection, no antibiotic can cure that bladder infection because they've been so overexposed to the antibiotics in the feed and in the excrements of these animals. And also, what has been found is that people who live nearby these intensive farms, the water is polluted. the water is contaminated. And by being exposed to this contaminated environment, these individuals also have all the signs of antibiotic resistance. They can get a simple infection, and the antibiotics cannot clear it up.
Yeah, absolutely shocking. On a brighter note, how has the vegan lifestyle helped you? What do you feel are the benefits to your health? If you could just summarize that for us.
Okay, so obviously you have a clearer conscience, number one, but and also it's taught me a lot about nutrition. I'm more aware about vitamin B12, vitamin D, magnesium, all these things thanks to veganism, and I've been able to help a lot of my friends and acquaintances, because if you want to practice veganism in a responsible manner, you need to do your homework, and you need to know, where to get what, especially in depleted soils, where the vitamin C content of an orange today is not what it was 50 years ago, and so we need to make sure that we catch up through whole foods. Obviously, far preferable to taking supplements, because supplements do not always contain the cofactors that come with a natural product. But I think veganism is sort of a part of a lifestyle, because to me, veganism is one element in my routine, in my daily routine, where I practice yoga, where I practice meditation, where I practice moderate sport, where I practice intermittent fasting and positive thinking. So it's actually part of a package deal, and it all goes together so well.
And one thing that you revealed to me to add on top of that is a minimalist lifestyle. Living minimally, and I absolutely love that. And I know you were saying that it helps you, do the work that you want to, because you have far less desires and wants, which allows you to have more time, more resources, more money to work on the things that matter, that bring joy to your heart and soul. Just tell me a little bit about what that involves.
Well, I think I'm very, very blessed in the sense that I own very little. I do not own a house or an apartment or a car or a television. I'm blessed in that my partner does all these things. It's her house, it's her car, etc., etc. So I can focus all my energy, all my time on trying to make the world a better place, on trying to reduce animal and human suffering, and not have to deal with, accountants and, paying bills, etc., paying parking fines. That is that doesn't come into the equation. So, but I think also, in all seriousness, that we create our own reality. So you can have your house, you can have your car, you can have your television, but you can still do what you want to do, and you can still make the world a better place simply by prioritizing the amount of time you spend watching television and the amount of time you spend doing, voluntary work for disabled children or whatever the case is. So I think I'm very fortunate, but I've come to the reality, the realization that we all create our own reality, and so I think that must be our compass.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know so many people, in fact, most people I know are interested in accumulating as much as they can, partly for their, maybe for the security, long-term security for their family, but also it's become a habit of just accumulating far more than what we need, because we don't know when enough is enough to start with. But the problem with all of that is the lifestyle and the overconsumption and taking out more than our fair share of this planet is that we're not going to have a planet left to have a happy life or secure life in. You could be the best consultant, doctor, accountant, lawyer, whatever you want to be in life. But if when you walk outside of your house and there's conflict, global warming, water shortages, resource shortages, all the problems that are happening right now that are spreading all over the world as a result of environmental breakdown, what is the point of having £1 million or dollars in the bank? They're not going to buy you clean air. They're not going to buy you clean water. It's just maybe a few days more of security. But the fact of the matter is we're all in this together. And I feel that most of us have to just take a step back in our accumulative actions every single day so that we dedicate our time and energy and resources to actually having a planet to live on so that the next generation survives and the one beyond it. Because from what I've learned, ours is the last generation that's going to be able to do anything to leave behind a sustainable world. Because beyond this, all the tipping points, the planetary boundaries, all of them get so beyond their limit. We've crossed them so far over what we can actually control and heal that it becomes impossible for any of us, for any humanitarian action to save ourselves. So, you raised and you spoke of a really important point of living as much as we can minimally so that we have clean air, enough water, enough food, shelter, stable climate, and a world with other beings to share this planet with. They are the ones, nature, animals, they're the ones that make this planet so beautiful. But, unless we dedicate our time and energy to it today, right now, we have no hope in hell, I feel, to actually build a world that or live in a world that we actually want to live in.
We must do as much as we can to preserve the earth, to reduce our carbon footprint, to consume as little as possible. Each and every one of us can contribute in a particular way. The obvious thing is, first of all, to stop eating animals, to stop using animals for food. That's a very, very important contributor to methane and greenhouse emissions. There's everything. There's so much that as individuals we can do.
There is this concept of leaving the earth alone. And if we leave enough of the earth alone and return it back to nature, we can save ourselves. But, and that only comes with, transitioning to a vegan lifestyle, like you said, because that cuts down the use of resources to 10% to what we're currently using, and just reducing our overall consumption and putting our needs before our wants so we can focus on the things that really matters. Before we end this beautiful conversation, are there any useful links or websites that come to your mind that you might want to share with the public besides the ones they've already mentioned?
I think in terms of specific websites, I think I've mentioned the ones that I wanted to. I just think that as a society, we are blessed today that we can access so much information on the internet if we want to make ourselves more aware of what's going on in the world, of what we can do to improve. If it's, for example, if you want, recently a friend of mine, their child had a birthday. So most of the friends brought and the family brought, toys and clothes. And I said, this is a certificate. I've planted 20 trees for you in the Amazon forest for your child. And, put it on her wall. That will remind her, of, perhaps it will influence her for future birthdays, not to receive presents, but to give presents. And I'm very pleased to see that in some communities, children, when it's their birthdays, they receive nothing. They say, please plant a tree for me in, Indonesia or whatever, or give a donation to an association that helps disabled children or an animal shelter. That's the mindset. That's the sort of thinking we need in 2023 and not accumulating more presents and more presents while some children in the world go with no food and no water.
Yeah, we have to remind ourselves that, because the earth, it looks after all of us, but it has limited resources to do that. And for everything that we take from her that we don't need, we're denying someone else. And by that someone, I don't mean just human beings. We're denying another being, an animal, nature, something it needs to survive. It's coming from someone's home, someone's safety, someone's shelter. So yeah, absolutely. We have to really think about giving more and protecting what we have. That's so precious to all of us. So once again, thank you, Andre. It's been eye-opening. It's been inspiring, because you've outlined some realistic actions that we can all take in eliminating and fighting and campaigning against some of the most heinous acts that we can perpetrate against the most vulnerable beings in our world. So thank you so much. As a last gift that you could give us, if you had one wish for the world, Andre, what would it be?
That we all realize that we are at our source unconditional love.
Guys, there are 3 actions we can take straight away, as Andre mentioned. Number 1, EDM 278. When you Google 278, as you scroll down, you will see the link for For Life on Earth. Going onto the website, you will clearly see the link to send the letter to your MP online and print out a physical letter that you can send. I personally do both to make sure that they get the message. Number 2, go to Animal Interfaith Alliance website. Click on Advocacy and then scroll down to Replacing Lab Animals with Human Relevant Test Methods. Here you will find 2 powerful actions you can take. 1, a petition for the group to hold a meeting with the CEOs of AstraZeneca and GSK to replace animal testing. And secondly, as you scroll down, you will find the link to support Operation Beagle, where you get guided on organizing local outreach and sharing the campaign. And lastly, share this podcast together with the links as widely as you can. This will enable us to not only reach the shareholders and investors who are enabling these injustices, but also to the entire population, who can put significant pressure on the government to change the laws that enable these crimes. Finally, do make sure to subscribe to this channel so you get notified when we release the next podcast. Incredibly exciting and inspiring guests working on the front lines, addressing other hidden injustices, will be empowering us with powerful solutions that we can start incorporating today. Till next time.